So for years, Russia's Vladimir Putin has used the country's Victory Day as a symbol of strength. One of the most important days in Russia's calendar, May 9th, has seen tanks roll through the Red Square in Moscow, fighter jets thunder overhead, and missiles, troops, and any other form of military hardware you can imagine, projecting an image of Russia that is confident, that is powerful, and crucially for Putin, historically unstoppable. But this year, something particularly unusual and uncomfortable is happening. You see, the tanks are gone, the cadets are gone, and the heavy military columns that have defined Russia's most sacred of political rituals are quietly being removed too. And the Kremlin says it's all because of a terrorist threat from Ukraine, the very country that Putin couldn't even come to recognize as a country, and that those who constantly say poses no threat to Russia is now seemingly posing enough of a threat to Russia to call or significantly scale back Victory Day. Because this isn't just any parade. It's the single most important political performance for not just modern Russia, but specifically for Putin and his leadership. Indeed, Moscow, the best protected city in the world, is no longer safe. And that shows just how significant things are changing beneath the surface. It's not simply about drones, it's about the fear. It's about the optics. And it is revealing something incredibly awkward, uncomfortable about where this war actually stands compared to where people claim it to be. So in this video, I wanted to go into what is happening with Russia's Victory Day right now, why it matters so much more than just simply symbolism, and how it could be leveraged, such as by Ukraine, to disrupt Putin's own ideas, his leadership, and what it could do about the state of Russia on the battlefield going forward.
This is the Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, where we look at the relationship of geopolitics, economics, international relations, and are returning to the Russia-Ukraine war. Because Victory Day is one of the most important days, not just for Russia as a whole, but specifically for Putin and his psychology, the way he looks at the world. It has evolved from merely a memorial event into this political ritual, a display of legitimacy, this carefully curated, staged performance of power, but also increasingly over the years since February 2022, a justification for the war. Now, I'm curious what you guys think about this. How much do you see this as simply a security precaution or yet another symbolism, another sign that things are not going well for Putin in Russia, but also how much Ukraine is getting under his skin specifically? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy long-form geopolitical analysis, then of course, do consider subscribing and liking the video. It's free and it really does help. But still, let's understand what Victory Day is. For over 2 decades, Putin has tied modern Russia to the memory of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany, or what the Russians call the Great Patriotic War. This message is usually quite simple, that Russia defeated fascism once, and that Russia must defeat it again. His historical narrative sits at the centre of the Kremlin's worldview, Putin's worldview, and every year on May 9th, that worldview is broadcast to millions across Russia, but of course, the world watching. But this year, the image before it's even become May is cracking. Because for the first time since the invasion, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia will not parade any armoured vehicles through the Red Square. No tanks at all. No missile launchers, no heavy military columns. A couple of years ago, it was noted how there was only one T-45, the historical tank that won in the Second World War. But this time, there's not even that. Moscow simply says it's due to operational conditions and security concerns. But the timing tells another story, because Ukraine has intensified long-range strikes deep inside Russian territory. Oil refineries have continued to burn and drone attacks are reaching Moscow more regularly. And so suddenly, the Kremlin appears less interested in the spectacle and more concerned genuinely about the vulnerability of personnel, of hardware, that the Ukrainians could seek to exploit as an opportunity to strike. Now, let's take a step back and emphasize why this matters, because you really need to understand what Victory Day represents inside Russia. It's not just another holiday. For many people I know personally from Russia, Victory Day is sort of almost a founding myth. The Soviet Union lost roughly 27 million people during the Second World War, a large proportion of that at the hands of Joseph Stalin. So basically, though, every family carries some connection to the Second World War and the traumas. It is incredibly emotional, incredibly personal, sacred, and politically untouchable. Under Putin, VD, as it's shortly known, has become the emotional glue that holds together the Russian identity and his leadership. The Great Patriotic War offers something powerful, a story where Russia was unquestionably heroic, where the enemy was clear, where sacrifice brought triumph, and where Moscow stood at the center of global history. Certainly in Western history, it isn't appreciated enough, I think, sometimes the sacrifices that the Soviets made. Not just Russians, but all of the Soviets. But for Putin, this matters enormously, because modern Russia lacks a universally shared ideology. There is no Soviet communism anymore, no clear economic success story, certainly not in the direction of the Russian economy right now, and no democratic legitimacy. So history becomes that substitute. Victory Day becomes a source of unity, and increasingly this justification for Putin's choice of politics, policy, and strategic decision-making. Now, before 2008, Victory Day commemorations were relatively low-key, relatively restrained. Indeed, they certainly didn't get the level of attention they got in the past 15 years. But Putin revived the Soviet-styled military spectacle. Heavy armour returned to Red Square, missiles rolling past the Kremlin walls, the aircraft flying overhead. The symbolism being deliberate. There's nothing necessarily wrong with being patriotic, but it was the particular angle it was done. The emphasis on Russia being back, strong again, surgent, defending against sort of Western clamping down, if you like, or encroachment. Especially, therefore, after 2014 and then 22, the parade took on an even more important role because it became linked directly to fighting in the Donbass and broader war in Ukraine. The Kremlin increasingly framed the invasion as a continuation of World War II, a fight against Nazism, a historical mission, a patriotic struggle. And Victory Day, in the eyes of many, became propagandized. Not subtle propaganda, but very explicit propaganda playing into the rhetoric of the state. Combat veterans from Ukraine marched through the Red Square. Drones were used in battle appearing in previous parades, and military symbolism only intensified. The message no longer simply remember the past, but more about sort of support the present, and the kinds of people that were invited reflected that even more. And so that's why this year's matters as well as more than ever, because removing the military hardware weakens the spectacle that this entire thing has become based around. The spectacle is the whole point here. Now, let's be specific about what makes it so interesting. The Kremlin says that the changes are due to security. Officially, there is a terrorist threat. Unofficially, there is paranoia, anxiety, lack of control. Ukraine, increasingly single-handedly with its drone warfare, has dramatically expanded its abilities to strike into Russia. And for much of the war, Russia could maintain the illusion that conflict was distant, that Russia is not affected by this, that Putin is the protector. The front line was somewhere else, not in your backyard. Life in Moscow, St. Petersburg, any major urban centre, relatively unaffected. It's normal. Prices relatively normal. But that illusion has been fading over the past year and a half, as we've covered extensively on the channel, with implications for the economy, be them from oil facilities affecting oil prices and energy prices, or just generally infrastructure and public services being disrupted. Moscow, surrounded by air defences, has seen growing incursions, and some reports suggest that stronger internet restrictions will be imposed on the parade days, even though there has been significant backlash against the clamping down of mobile internet access and VPNs, as we've seen earlier on in 2026. The Russians are so desperate that they're willing to take that risk. Military bloggers close to the Kremlin have openly discussed the fear of an attack during the parade itself, because imagine the optics here. There is a sudden missile warning interrupting Putin's signature, not just event, but his speech. Crowds scatter, air defense systems activating over Moscow. Even if nothing were to land, even if nothing were actually on its way, that image alone would be devastating, completely redefining for everything that Putin has built his image and his government, his system on. It's never really about the physical damage. Ukraine doesn't necessarily need to do anything. It just needs to hint at the idea that it could be planning something for the entire implications to be felt, not just across the political system, but the elites and, of course, the public. And this is where the story really becomes fascinating, because the threat alone is enough. The perception matters more than the physical need to do so. Ukraine has introduced such uncertainty into Russia's most symbolic political event that they're scaling it back at such levels and willing to clamp down on communications, even though that risks more ire from the Russian population. Wars, of course, as we know, are not really ever fought only on the battlefields, and increasingly it's more defined by the social media and economic aspects. For years, Moscow has projected this certainty, the control, the invulnerability. But scaling back Victory Day to this level, coupled with everything else from the economics or the clampdown on communications, suggests the overriding paranoia, the concern, and that the Russian government, that Putin really does not have a handle on the situation. That's one of Ukraine's most significant achievements here, because it's not necessarily changing the territory, but it changes the perception, which over time, if you undermine enough of the morale and potential for desertion, you can physically change the territory too. Now, interestingly, Moscow's explanation evolved over time. Initially, officials referred vaguely to the operational situation. There was no mention of drones and no direct blame, but later the Kremlin shifted. Suddenly, Ukraine was the only and entire explanation. Terrorist activity, security threats, civilian risk, attempting to reframe it as the country taking a responsibility and protection of its citizens. It matters because it serves two purposes, therefore. Firstly, it justifies scaling back the parade, and second, it reinforces the Kremlin's broader messaging that Ukraine has become the aggressor, supported by the broader Western bloc, or specifically now Europe, as America seems to step back and Russia and Trump continue to be chummy. This framing is very politically useful, especially when symbolic events become harder to control. But of course, there is contradiction here, because if Russia is winning decisively, as the Kremlin says it is, why does Moscow have to clamp down on an event to protect against the side which is seemingly being overwhelmed and is losing? Why does the capital require communication shutdowns? Why remove military hardware from the single biggest patriotic event of the year? These are uncomfortable questions, and more uncomfortably, increasingly common ones, and the Russians are increasingly aware of these contradictions, albeit they worry still about their capacity to raise them. Indeed, on a side note, I just wanted to say that the absence of tanks is also particularly interesting. The tanks are very symbolic. They're one of the most important aspects of Russia's parades. Heavy armor, in the eyes of autocratic states, represents state power. Look at Trump when he did his own form in DC. Military confidence, momentum, they all are associated with heavy industrial equipment like tanks. So removing them changes the emotional tone of Russia's event too. Victory Day without armor is like a coronation without a crown. The ceremony still exists, but there's something significantly missing here. And the symbolism matters because of just how deeply embedded it is within authoritarian systems. Look at what North Korea does. Look at what China does on a regular basis. Strongman politics relies heavily on these particular events, and Putin's legitimacy isn't any more different. It's not built on the elections or anything like those. It's built on the control, the sense of strength, and of course, destiny. So when an event designed to display power becomes visibly constrained, people notice, even if they do not say it openly, at least in the country. And then, simultaneously, as I was recording this video, preparing the script, another development added a very revealing layer. Putin came off the phone with Donald Trump, where, according to Kremlin officials, the call lasted around 90 minutes, and Putin reportedly signaled a willingness to even halt hostilities during Victory Day. He is not just offering it during symbolic holidays of Easter or of Christmas, but specifically to Russia, that they want a temporary pause to allow Russians to enjoy the events of that day. Perhaps precisely because if they can say that the war is not currently in progress, then it will dissuade Ukraine from being able to act, because it's not technically operating or as potential source of targeting under international law. It is a massive revelation there to see Putin offer this in a way that he never has done before. And he also told Trump that Russia remains open to negotiations while insisting the military goals would be achieved, that they are being achieved. Even though, of course, that's nowhere near the case. But despite all of that, Trump coming out to say that Ukraine's military has effectively been defeated. Which in that case, one would wonder, why aren't the Russian forces already within the perimeters, within the outskirts of Kiev? But of course, that's talking about Donald Trump. The war increasingly operates on two tracks, the military pressure and the political theatre, and they couldn't be further from each other. All in all, if Russia's most important symbolic event now requires a scaled-back security set of measures, communications blackouts, and reduced military spectacles, then Ukraine has already achieved something, but is continuing to achieve even more. And it just goes to show just how far this could change in the next part of this year. But that's it from me, everyone. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. If you enjoyed the video, then of course do give it a thumbs up. It's free. Do subscribe if you want more like this. We've got some exciting collaborations with Paul Wahlberg and others, but also the likes of General Wesley Clark, former NATO commander, General Mick Ryan, of course, as well, coming on, and a couple of senators. A lot coming on the show in the next few weeks, and I look forward to seeing you all there. But as always, we'll see you next time on the Global Gambit. Take care.